Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
On the line, the great Senator Bob Day. How are you, sir?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bien d'être avec toi. Good to be with you again.
Comment ça va?
Ah, très bien, merci.
Where does the French come from?
Oh, just a bit of schoolboy French and some French met some French people on our travels years ago and kept in touch. So corresponding in a bit of French and it's such a beautiful language.
Oh, it is.
And it was mandatory, Bob. I remember back at De La Salle College in Malvern in Victoria. It was mandatory to do a language or two, and French was one of the ones I was coerced into, given there was nothing else except Latin. Five years of French.
Yeah, if you try and use it, it always puts you in good stead and meeting people and introducing
Latin
yourself.
is a good one, though, Bob, because that is the root of all the English language.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the what are they called? Declension or whatever.
Oh, look, my favourite one is Recepta Loquitur. Let the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah. Caveat emptor.
Look, before we get on there, that Helsinki, while we're speaking about Europe, your previous...
happiest country in the world.
Helsinki, freezing cold, but it's interesting little factual about that. I think the average temperature of Helsinki is 0. It goes from like -10 up to +10 and so on. And by comparison, Singapore has an average temperature of 30 degrees. Got 2 big cities, one with an average of 0 degrees, one with an average of 30 degrees. And lo and behold, the population seems to cope quite well living in a 30-degree difference temperature city. So when there's concern about climate change where we might have a 2 or 3 degree kind of difference, the potential to adapt is demonstrably easy. That if people can live very comfortably in 0 and very comfortably in 30 degrees, then adapting to a 2 or 3 degree change, but common sense would tell you that it's
what a good point.
A good point.
Well, it's what we get used to. I remember a friend of mine, he got conscripted in the Nashos and he went up, he was objected to picking up a weapon to fire in anger. And he said, look, I'm not against conscription. I'm prepared to serve my 2-year term. And he said, look, what else can I do? So they sent him up to Papua New Guinea to teach the natives up there English. And he said it took him about 3 months to adapt to the weather because it was hot and steamy. And he said after 3 months I could sleep through a hurricane.
They didn't eat him, did they?
No, he survived. He survived.
Well, there you go. It's just an interesting fact. And,
it's a very good point. Very good point, Bob.
I think Einstein used to say about facts when he first came out with his theory of relativity and upset all the establishment, and these other scientist colleagues came and said, we've got a letter here and a petition. We've had 100 scientists sign it to say you're wrong. And he says, why 100? Why 100? You only need 1. If you think I'm wrong, then prove it to me with the facts. And the consensus, this idea of how consensus seems to have any weight, it didn't have any bearing at all on Einstein. He said, you only need 1 person to present the facts, and if you're right, then the weight of your argument should work. And I mean Einstein, he used to say, I want to know the mind of God. All the rest are mere details. And that should be our approach.
I like that. I want to know the mind.
In fact,
of God.
Mind of God. The rest are merely details. Your story about the guy, the radio guy who bought the shirt companies. reminded me of the wonderful story. There used to be an aircraft manufacturing company, Les, you remember that, called Avros.
Yes.
AV Row, Avro for short. And they had this big factory in England, and they occupied this entire, almost half a suburb, but except for this one tiny little corner of these two roads where there was a little gospel chapel, a little tiny little church on the corner. Anyway, and it kind of joined their paint shop. So the Avros wanted to expand their paint shop. So they wrote to the church and said, look, we want to expand our paint shop. You know, you're kind of occupying a little space there. Look, name your price. We need that land. Just, name your price. We'll just buy you out, and, boom, boom, boom. And lo and behold, they got a letter back from the Gospel Chapel, and it said, well, what a coincidence, because we're thinking about expanding our church and we want to take over all your land. So just name your price and we'll buy it from you. Signed, F.W. Cadbury, Secretary. So, of course, Cadbury's was bigger than Avro's back in those days. But just, sometimes you can kind of... anyway, they think they stayed where they were.
Senator, I'll tell you what, you mentioned Avro. You mentioned Avro. This is the very day, March 21, 1931, that Australian National Airways, Avro Anson, 3-engined Fokker, it was called the Southern Cloud. It disappeared during a storm in the Southern Alps on a Sydney to Melbourne flight. It crashed near, what is that? How would I say that? Kiandra, I suppose. Kiandra, Kiandra, in New South Wales. The wreckage and the remains of the victims were found by accident October 1958, but the plane went down this day in 1931.
Oh.
A 3-engined Avro Anson.
Avro. I thought well, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. I'll make a note of that. I thought you were going to say about the flight where Charles Hawker was killed on this, but that was on his way to Melbourne. It was in Mount Dandenong, I think it was. Charles Hawker from South Australia they thought that he was going to be the next Prime Minister to take over from Menzies. In fact, I was up in Riverton a couple of weeks ago, and there's a place there near Riverton called Giles Corner. And there's a little monument. Bert Kelly, who's my old friend, mentor, took me up there. They placed this little monument plaque on the corner, Giles Corner, as a memorial to Charles Hawker, who was killed in that in that crash. And Bert Kelly became the member for Wakefield. Was pressured into taking up the cause. So, yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for that one. But look, the topic of the day has got to be how, unless we look, before you go, Subs, Shinzo Abe going Japanese, John Bruno, absolutely 100%. He was dead right. We should have gone Japanese. When I was in the Senate in 2013, 14, 15, and we were talking about submarines, and I got the parliamentary budget office or someone to check out the prices of submarines off the shelf. And I was told that we could buy off-the-shelf submarines from the British, the Astute class, for $2 billion each. That was only 10 years ago, $2 billion. Last year, they announced they're going to buy these new ones for $45 billion each. Yeah. I mean, how could you go from $2 billion to $45 billion?
You can't. Let the buyer beware. What would the Japanese deal have been, do you think?
It was even less than that, because the Astute ones, of course, were nuclear powered. Yeah. But the Japanese one, in fact, an interesting factoid about the Japanese submarines, the propulsion system of the Japanese submarines is still the same today as it was during World War II, and still it's better than even the modern day propulsion systems. They still don't. The rest of the world still doesn't know how the Japanese, the design, their technology, their propulsion systems now, 70 years after the end of the war. And that's how good the Japanese submarines are. And we should have done that deal instead of heading off. We should have formed this much, much stronger alliance with the Japanese and with India as well, but particularly the
Senator,
Japanese.
I was talking with John Bruni off air just before he left the building, and we sort of nutted across these issues of the submarine and economic value to South Australia, because I said to him, it's like Trump. We need to cast the stone back a lot further than just the immediate administration or immediate government and say, yeah, how did all this start? It's like the Ukraine. How did it all start? It was actually because of NATO and the Ukraine getting involved. And people forget that. But people also forget that if we cast the stone back here in Adelaide and South Australia about the economic benefits that were told to us, members of the public, from the Premier at the time, Mike Grant and Kevin Foley, there were untold benefits to our state in terms of employment and value, literally money value, for building or having a military shipbuilding facility at Osborne. Now, the reality, Bob, after all these years, and we are talking about, you can probably put an actual dimension of the number of years ago that this was all told to us. The reality to me as a member of the public is that it's amounted to almost zero. I mean, we haven't necessarily got more jobs for the South Australian public. We haven't economically upscaled our input and exported these products that we were going to make. It's just amounted to a lot of hot air. Now AUKUS seems to me to be a never-ending story. And a lot of people who we've spoken to on air have actually said their view of this is that it's still going to amount to nothing.
It will, because they do things for the wrong reasons. And suggesting that your defence policy should be based on some job creation scheme is nuts.
Yes, agreed.
Defence should be based on what is the best system for defence of the realm, for defence of Australia. What is the ideal, the best design, not which city needs the most employment, and because you end up with neither. If you're trying to do both, you end up with neither. It's the old fallacy that if half the people prefer blue and the other half prefer yellow, and you think that everyone's going to be happy with green. That's not how it works.
No.
All you end up with, you don't get blue, you don't get yellow, you don't get employment, you don't get defence, you get nothing.
How do you think it would be if we had a benevolent dictatorship? Because we do this sort of thing every 3 years.
Oh, well, Singapore is a perfect example of what you can do with a benevolent dictatorship. It's phenomenal. I mean, the civil libertarians, there'll all be someone. Look, but we don't have one. This is where I think Donald Trump, for all what people say about it, I think is the best thing that's happened to the world. The world has been pretending, since World War II, the world has been pretending that the whole world is like a big school playground where you've got the bullies and the weaklings. And the United States has been the teacher monitoring the playground, going around, stopping the bullies from hitting the weaklings. And everyone's got this kind of charade that they've been pretending this is how, it all is. And then Donald Trump comes along and says, look, you weaklings, you don't need to be weak. Germany, you're very wealthy. Australia, you're very wealthy. You're intelligent, you're wealthy. You don't need to be weak. And so he said, I'm going to stop. I'm stopping protecting you from these bullies. You can protect yourself. Yeah. And of course, we all know what happens when people take away their benefits that they've been getting all this time. All hell breaks loose. And I think the best thing you can do is give someone a dose of reality.
And you're right, Bob, because Miranda Devine wrote a very good article in which she basically, in summary, said Australia and other countries need to grow up and fend for themselves. I mean,
totally.
the protectionism and the being under the cover of someone else has to eventually.
It doesn't
dissipate.
help you. In the end, he's doing you a favour. It's like on the front page of the Advertiser today, all these farmers coming out wanting drought relief, wanting this relief. We've created a monster where, after how many years of record yield crops have we had in the last few? We haven't had a drought in South Australia for, 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. Had a phenomenal yield. The amount of grain and food that we export has been off the charts, and yet the very first sign of a drought, they go running off to the government demanding relief and subsidies and handouts, and the Premier's only got himself to blame. He shells out money for sports and pop concerts and gather rounds and all the rest of it.
Car races.
And we've been lulled into this passive dependency, this learned dependency, and we don't get it for free, this dependency. No. They're charging it, like you say, the cost of housing, half the cost of every house is all taxes and charges.
You'd know about that.
We'll get onto that in a moment, but the government is charging us an absolute fortune for our dependency, when the best thing they can do is look after yourself.
Stand on your own 2 feet. Yeah.
Because we're not going to come and rescue you every time something goes wrong.
No.
But of course, that's what they do.
I guess end of the day, Bob, there needs to be, it's a question of balance. I mean, how the funds allocated to placate most people. And Mally's pretty good at the art of the Roman Forum. So entertain the public, and the public just fits into place and says, live golf, gather around, you name it, all these things that
lots to
that
do,
put
lots
on.
to look at.
The public thinks everything's tickety-boo and hunky-dory, and let's get on with it. But the reality is there's a lot of underlying problems, look at Victoria.
I know, but the chickens come home to roost. That only works for a while, and that all works until it doesn't. And then they just kick him out because, as we know, and we all know, those who've been in politics know how fickle public opinion is. They might love him one day, but it's a mile wide and an inch deep. The moment things turn around, bang, they would vote him out in a heartbeat if things started to go wrong. And we've seen these, green energy, hydrogen things collapse and all the rest of it, and it wouldn't take very much at all.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
For him to be on the nose in no time at all.
Senator, I don't know how many inquiries you've seen or how many inquiries you've been involved in, but we've had this, they're calling... Quite
a few.
Well, there's another one coming, I believe, for childcare. An expose which has shown up many, many problems with childcare. And probably the biggest problem is that the government has said, if you're earning between nothing and $500,000, you get free childcare. Well, I say there's nothing for free anyway, but I'm amazed that people on $500,000 a year need the government, the taxpayer, to pay for their childcare. But anyway.
Well, look, you say childcare, but don't forget to add on that next word, the childcare industry.
Oh, yes. And
the Labor Party favours the childcare industry over families, and they would much rather have children being cared for by strangers in the childcare industry than giving equal opportunity for families to look after their own children.
Yes, perfect, absolutely.
But you don't. You get no benefit at all. If you want to look after your own children, you don't get any benefits. But if you want to go out to work and then let someone else look after it, they'll subsidise it the heck out of it.
But they get surprised when the subsidy, a little bit like Medicare and God knows what else, the moment government gets involved and they're putting money in, the prices go up according to the amount of money that the taxpayer's putting in.
Yeah, well, that's the way they want it. They like to control it. They want to control everything from cradle to the grave.
But it's a dog chasing its tail. You'll never do it.
That's the way they like it, and they don't want the dog to ever catch the car or catch its tail. But look, just from the start of the program this morning, I've got to disagree with Maria. I love listening to Maria, but when it comes to housing, and she's going on about When we were young, we used to scrimp and scrape to get into a house, and if you saved coffees, you didn't drink coffees and all the rest of it, you could save $7,000 a year. And yet, young people see that, they hear that, we could save 7,000, but they also see that after a year, the house has gone up by 70,000. So they think houses are going up by $70,000 a year, and you want me to try and stop drinking coffee and going out for to the movies to save $7,000. So they've just given up. Whereas when we all started, including Maria and the rest of us, all started in housing, you could leave school and get a regular job and buy a house because houses were only 3 times the average income. They're not now; they're 10 times the average income. And even with interest rates, it's still, back in those days, it was still affordable. Houses were not more, it's 50% of the cost of a house. In fact, that's the cost of a house, Jeremy. The cost of land is like 75% government regulation.
What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it?
Well, we can keep agitating for it. We can keep... what I call in minor party. I was involved in a minor party, and I'm still involved in minor party political alliances. And we play what we call seesaw politics, because the way Liberal and Labor have organised the system, you're always going to have the Liberals on one end of the seesaw and Labor on the other. They've arrowdited themselves to the seats. And it's a bit like Coles and Woolies. They own the marketplace, and then everyone else has to kind of stand in the middle of the seesaw and try and lean one way or the other, depending on whether they prefer Liberal policy or Labor policy. So all we can do is try to get more minor parties or independents into Parliament, and then put pressure on them and say, look, if you want our support for this policy or that policy, we want you to do something about the cost of housing. We want you to free up. And I've been banging on about this urban growth and expanding the urban footprint. This idea that building on prime agricultural land is absolute fallacy. Anyone just grab a map. Anyone could just get a map and have a look at it, and you can see that the amount of land used for housing or needed for housing is so minuscule. The amount of land just in the north of Adelaide up to Port Wakefield and within an hour and a half of Adelaide, you could fit a city of 20 million people there. So to get a few extra suburbs around Roseworthy and some of these other places, it's like 0.0001% of the land. And I think it's absolutely shameful of these farming bodies like the Farmers Federation and the Grain Corp and so on to be jumping up and down saying, they're taking valuable farmland. It is absolutely false. It's not true. And in fact, Australia exports far more food than it needs for itself. So there's absolutely no foundation whatsoever in the argument that there's a trade-off between housing or farmland.
And is there anybody that can pick up the government and say, you're on the wrong tram here? The media should be doing this probably.
Well, look, to be fair to Peter Mallett, I've been saying this for the last 20 years and, through all sorts of channels, saying that urban growth is the right way to go, and urban densification, squeezing more and more people into existing suburbs that were never designed for it, ever. The Adelaide suburbs and all the infrastructure of water pipes, sewer pipes, gas pipes, road widths and all that.
You mean designed, urban infill?
Urban infill. Yeah. The original Adelaide suburbs were designed for 1,000 people per square kilometre. Yeah. Squeezing 5,000 people per square kilometre into those suburbs just doesn't work.
You destroy your quality of life to begin with, but it's going to be...
destroy heaps of things. You destroy all the biodiversity of the trees and shrubs and bird life and all the possums running, through the trees and so on. So he announced on Monday this week that they're going to move away from urban infill and more into urban growth. So at least they've acknowledged now that that was a mistake. But like I said in my letter to the editor on Tuesday, the worst thing you can do, and maybe we could finish on this, the worst thing that you can do is put decisions into the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.
No, true. That's a lovely line, actually. That's a very good line.
Those of us in the private sector, we pay a very heavy price for our mistakes, and I've made them and paid the price, and I'm sure you have too, Jeremy. But in politics, the Mike Rands and the Jay Weatheralls and the John Rows that made these disastrous planning decisions, they pay no price for being wrong.
Churchill said, show me the consequence and I will show you the behaviour. So if there ain't no consequence, God, you get people doing what they like. But
exactly. In fact, sometimes they say, is it a consequence or was it an objective? Was it an objective all along? And in politics, there are no just consequences. Whatever result you get in politics, that's what it was designed to do.
Senator, I don't know whether you would, what side of this you would come down on. But Caroline's brought me this. It's a little flyer which says our Roads SA is again hosting a meeting of candidates focused on the Greater Adelaide Freight Bypass. Now, I would think this is about the thousands and thousands of heavy vehicles that run up and down all hours of the day and night, up and down roads like Portrush Road, just up there, or actually down there. We have been promised a ring route, so you get all of these vehicles off the suburban streets. Bring on the bypass, it says here.
Look, I have been writing about. I'm an ex-highways department. I started my career with the highways department when it was the leading department in the state. And my very first job was the Southeastern Freeway. Was working on that in 1969. So look, if we were to most of the freight that comes through South Australia, of course, comes from Melbourne, and once it gets to Murray Bridge, if it was then detoured via Truro and came in via the Northern Expressway, not only would it save about an hour and a half in the journey, the distance is a bit longer, but a non-stop bypass road, a two-lane road, and the cost of it compared to the cost of say, with our submarine project, $100 million naval facility, and came in that way. And then if they put a bridge over the Port River, it's only 10 minutes from Osborne over to Edinburgh Air Base. So if you came down the Northern Expressway, put a bridge over the Port River, you could be in Osborne in 15 minutes. Instead of having to come through all the suburbs and Hampstead Road, Grand Junction Road, Port Rush Road, and so on. Absolutely, I am 100% in favour of that bypass. It would transform South Australia. In fact, when I started the highways, they had the MATS plan.
And that's when they were actually making roads back then, I guess.
The Metropolitan Adelaide Transport Study, the MATS plan, it was based on the Perth freeway network system. We had all the roads and corridors already purchased, all the houses, the properties, everything was already owned by the state government owned by the Commissioner of Highways, Mr. Joe Hinkey, and it was ready to go. And then lo and behold, Don Dunstan was elected. First thing he did was scrap the MATS plan. Never recovered. We've never recovered. But anyway, it's not too late.
What happened to all the land?
They sold it off. And now they have to buy it all back again.
Oh, God.
And they pay no price for being wrong.
No, exactly. They pay no price for being wrong. Good to talk to you, Senator.
Yeah, bless you, Jeremy.
Bless you. I love your sanity. I love your clear vision of things.
Bless you, Jeremy. And you too, Les.
Thanks, Bob.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.